Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Knowledge Channel. Here, we believe knowledge is the fundamental resource for every human endeavor. We therefore pursue knowledge to gain deep understanding, so we can develop the wisdom needed to tackle life's many challenges successfully. Today, I will discuss an intriguing topic that has brought down presidents, kings, and even nations: pride. Pride in its innocent and ordinary form is a good thing. One can be proud of a great accomplishment. Parents can be proud of a good child who is doing well in school and other areas of life, and people can express pride about a good government that is focused on making the lives of its citizens better. There is another form of pride that can be destructive. A blinding pride that elevates one above all others and even God is destructive, and this is the type of pride I will be talking about in this video. I will be discussing the destructive power of this type of pride, providing examples of people and even nations who have fallen victim to its deceit. Pride has been an issue in the lives of humans since creation, and has the potential to lead to personal downfall and destruction. Pride is not limited to an individual attribute, but can be exhibited by groups, communities, society, and even nations. In Christianity, pride is considered a deadly sin that can drive believers far away from God, leading to both physical and spiritual death. But what is pride? In its contemporary form, pride can be defined as an amplified belief in one's own capabilities, abilities, righteousness, wealth, and importance. It is the attitude of elevating oneself above all others, and most importantly, even above God. The price of pride can be devastating and destructive for the individual, because God hates pride in this form. The book of Proverbs 16:18 reads, "Pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall." This verse establishes the direct link between pride, downfall, and destruction, warning the proud of the inevitable consequences of the attitude. I will be discussing in great detail this destructive aspect of pride in this video, providing examples from the Bible of incidences when people and nations exhibited this form of pride and the resulting consequences of their actions. Pride can be manifested in two forms: healthy and destructive forms of pride. When one accomplishes a difficult and challenging task, achieves a major milestone in life, or performs an honorable act in society, one can express a sense of pride positively and progressively. The other form of pride results from a real accomplishment that brings joy and progress to one's life or society. This is a healthy and happy pride. However, there is another form of pride that is considered sinful, dark, and destructive. This type of pride has its foundation in self-recognition, self-centeredness, self-exaltation, and an inflated view of one's power and capabilities that can only lead to failure and destruction. This form of pride blinds one to one's limitations and believes that one is better than anyone else, and so deserves more recognition and praise than others. The height of this form of pride is when one elevates oneself above God and believes they have accomplished anything solely through their own power and wisdom, eliminating God from the picture. This form of pride alienates the perpetrator from friends, family, and God, leading to ultimate downfall and destruction. The Bible contains many examples of people who exalted themselves above others, and even God, through their over-amplified views of their power, and accomplished and consequently faced disgrace, downfall, or outright destruction. The Bible views pride as a sin and a departure from God's will, making the proud person an enemy of God. Pride tempts us to elevate ourselves above others, disregard God, and deny our dependence on His grace and power to accomplish anything in life. Pride is the fundamental cause of all sins and disobedience to God. Pride leads to disobedience, taking us away from the will and plans of God. This path leads to certain failure, downfall, and destruction, as we will see later from the Bible examples. Pride creates a distance between us and God, leading to a false sense of security, self-sufficiency, hypocrisy, lack of love, and absence of empathy for others. Humility brings us closer to God, walking in His ways, obeying His commandments, and receiving His protection and blessing in our lives. The Bible has a lot to say about pride, pointing out its peril and destructive power. Proverbs 11:2 states, "When pride comes, then comes disgrace, but with humility comes wisdom." Equally, Proverbs 29:23 states, "Pride brings a person low, but the lowly in spirit gain honor." Pride is a rejection of the authority of God, a distortion of reality, and has serious consequences for the perpetration. Compared to pride, humility brings true strength, draws us closer to God, and constantly reminds us that we depend on God to accomplish anything in our lives. Humility enables us to remember that the earth and its entire content belong to God, as stated in Psalm 24:1, which reads, "The earth and everything in it, the world and its inhabitants, belong to the Lord." But what is the origin of pride? I will answer this question next. Pride is not a new phenomenon, but has been in existence for a long time, probably even before creation. The Bible gives an account of the rebellion of Lucifer, an angel of God in heaven, due to pride. Pride led Lucifer, who considered himself higher than God, to rebel against his master. Isaiah in 14:12-14 reads, "How you have fallen from heaven, morning star, son of the dawn. You have been cast down to the earth, you who once laid low the nations. You said in your heart, I will ascend to the heavens, I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will sit enthroned on the mount of assembly, on the utmost heights of Mount Zaphon. I will ascend above the tops of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High." These verses narrate the pride of Lucifer, who elevated himself above God and boasted about his power to set his throne above that of God in defiance of his Creator. Lucifer, as an angel of God, was granted many powers to serve God faithfully and according to His will. Lucifer wanted to be greater than God. In fact, he believed he was above God and was going to set up his own throne above that of God. This is the first incident of pride and represents its origin. He rebelled against God. God created Lucifer as a high-ranking angel with exceptional beauty, power, and wisdom. He had a high position and was charged with serving God as an advisor. The status of Lucifer is described in Ezekiel 28:12-15, which reads, "You were the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. You were in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone adorned you. You were blameless in your ways from the day you were created till wickedness was found in you." Instead of maintaining his high position with humility and acknowledging that his position, beauty, and power were given to him freely by God, Lucifer became selfish and arrogant. He was no longer satisfied with his elevated position, but desired to place himself above God and all creation. His ambition led him to seek equality with God. Pride came over Lucifer, and he lost his exalted position and became a fugitive along with some angels who joined his rebellion. As a result of his pride and rebellion, God threw him out of the heave down to the earth, where he has since formed the kingdom of Satan, fighting against the people of God. Revelation 12:7-9 details this event as follows. Then war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back. But he was not strong enough, and they lost their place in heaven. The great dragon was hurled down, that ancient serpent called the devil, or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. He was hurled to the earth, and his angels with him. Lucifer's pride brought him downfall and destruction, losing his prestigious position in heaven and being cast down to earth with his angels. Lucifer's pride, rebellion, and eventual fall from grace have affected humanity greatly and negatively. He transformed from a high-ranking angel of God to Satan, the enemy of God, tormenting humans from the Garden of Eden till today. As with Lucifer, the consequences of pride have always been a catastrophic failure and destruction for all who engage in this evil practice even today. The consequence of pride for Lucifer, as we have seen, was that Lucifer was excommunicated from the presence of God and heaven and thrown down to the earth. It's a dangerous vice, a transgression against God's divine order. True virtue lies in humility and acknowledging our dependence on the power greater than ourselves that resides only with God. Uncontrolled pride eventually leads to destruction. God hates the proud, but shows favor and mercy to the humble. True power and everlasting victory are found in surrendering ourselves and acknowledging our need for divine guidance from God. Before we continue, please like, share, and subscribe to my channel. This will allow you to receive automatic notifications whenever I upload a new video. Thank you for your support. I will talk about the terrible consequences of pride next. The Bible contains several examples of individuals and even nations who exhibited extreme pride and were punished with devastating consequences. We touched on the most famous one, the pride and fall of Lucifer, in the last session. This incident constitutes the origin of pride and the birth of Satan as we know it. This act of pride and consequent rebellion resulted in Lucifer's expulsion from heaven and his transformation into Satan. Another vivid example is King Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon in the book of Daniel. This story is detailed in Daniel 4:30-31, which reads, "The king spoke, saying, Is this not great Babylon, that I have built for a royal dwelling by my mighty power and for the honor of my majesty?" While the word was still in the king's mouth, a voice fell from heaven, "King Nebuchadnezzar, to you it is spoken, the kingdom has departed from you." The king was overtaken with pride for his presumed accomplishment. Taking pride in one's accomplishment is not particularly bad, but God must be given the glory and adoration as the source of the power and resources. King Nebuchadnezzar attributed the entire accomplishment to himself as the singular source of power and grace. God immediately humiliated him by taking the kingdom from him, showing that all powers come from God, and he is the source of the strength to accomplish anything in this world. The consequences were severe and included humiliation, removing him as king and taking away his sanity so that he became like an animal, walking on all fours and feeding on vegetation for 7 years. His pride led to his downfall and a period of madness, reminding him that all power belongs to the divine, and he gives to rulers as he desires. This example sends a clear message of the price of pride, destruction, and downfall. The Bible's message is clear. Pride is a dangerous path that leads to destruction. Yet another example of pride and its consequences found in the Bible is that of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. The story of Pharaoh and his hardened heart full of pride is told in Exodus. Pharaoh, as a result of pride and arrogance, stubbornly refused to let the children of Israel go in peace. Pride led him not to humble himself before the God of Israel, resulting in his kingdom suffering 10 horrific plagues and eventual destruction of his entire army in the Red Sea. Exodus 10:3 reads, "So Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and said to him, 'This is what the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, says. How long will you refuse to humble yourself before me? Let my people go so that they may worship me.' Pharaoh's pride and stubbornness lead to the death of thousands of his people and the fall of his kingdom. Pride blinds us to our limitations and the extent of the power of God Almighty and eventual destruction. Herod Agrippa, the king of Judea, is another example of how pride and failure to give God his glory can have devastating consequences. During a public speech in Caesarea in 44 AD, his subjects proclaimed him as God, and he proudly accepted this proclamation without reservation, and failed to acknowledge the power and sovereignty of God. The account is narrated in Acts 12:21-23, which reads, "On an appointed day, dressed in royal robes and seated on the throne, Herod delivered a speech to them. The assembled people began to shout, 'It's the voice of a God and not of a man.' At once an angel of the Lord struck him because he did not give the glory to God, and he was eaten by worms and died." Pride allowed Herod to accept being called God, and this cost him his disgraceful public death. These stories tell us a great deal about the nature and consequences of pride. Pride, regardless of its form, is a deadly sin that can have a devastating consequence. When we have achieved a high level of wealth, fame, and power in life, the tendency to become overconfident, arrogant, and overambitious, pride will slowly creep in, and we will forget that God has given us all we have. Instead of thanking God for his grace and mercies on us, we claim the glory for ourselves and begin to attribute our accomplishments solely to our efforts, power, and wisdom. This is when pride takes over, leading many to downfall and destruction. From the stories of people who exhibited pride and the consequences they received, it is clear that God hates pride in every form and will punish its perpetrators. Thus, God actively resists pride and teaches us to avoid this behavior by all means possible. God's views about pride are expressed in many verses in the Bible. James 4:6 reads, "But he gives us more grace. That is why Scripture says, 'God opposes the proud, but shows favor to the humble.'" This illustrates how God views pride, indicating that God absolutely resists this attitude and denies the perpetrator any grace. He, on the other hand, gives grace freely to the humble person. Provide 8:13 further demonstrates how much God hates pride when it states, "To fear the Lord is to hate evil. I hate pride and arrogance, evil behavior and perverse speech." This verse indicates that pride is equivalent to evil and highlights the lack of fear and respect for the sovereignty of the Lord. Isaiah 2:11 also expresses how much God hates pride and the punishments he will allocate the perpetrator when it states, The eyes of the arrogant will be humbled and human pride brought low. The Lord alone will be exalted in that day. This verse implies that God expects humans to humble themselves, and anyone who does not follow humility will be brought low by God himself, because only God has the glory and praise. Pride cannot exist alongside the sovereignty of God. Jesus paralleled this verse in Luke 18:14, which reads, "For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted." Thus, pride in the presence of God will lead to downfall, while the humble will receive grace and elevation. Elevating oneself through pride will only lead to humiliation, while the humble will be elevated. God detests pride for many reasons, but mainly because it is a sin and evil. Pride is a demonstration of selfishness and self-centeredness, which changes one's focus from God to self. A proud person foolishly relies on their own strength and wisdom, forgetting and eliminating the role of God as the giver of all good things. Pride leads to rebellion and disobedience to the commandment of God, leading to downfall, as in the case of Lucifer, as explained earlier. Pride does not acknowledge the sovereignty of God, believing that they are in full control of their destiny, ignoring the authority of God. Pride creates division, alienation, and altercation among people, leading to unhealthy competition and jealousy. For these reasons and many others, God hates pride and cannot stand it. Christians must avoid pride by all means and strive to embrace humility and love at all times. But how do we embrace humility? We will discuss this next. Humility is the opposite of pride and the way of the Lord. Humility is about being modest, respectful, conscious about one's limitations, and not having an inflated sense of one's importance and capabilities. A humble person understands that all powers, blessings, accomplishments, and skills come from God, and always conducts himself or herself according to this belief in interacting with others. Humility demands that we recognize God as sovereign and submit ourselves totally to his control, depending on him for all our needs, giving him the credit for all our accomplishments. Jesus Christ is the epitome and ideal example of someone who exhibited humility in all his days. Philippians 2:5-8 reads, "In your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who, being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. And being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross." Believers must take a cue from the birth and life of Jesus Christ about what humility really means. Humility has the power to transform outcomes in relationships and interactions between people. It is a pathway to having a good relationship with God, thereby attracting his blessing, favor, and achieving real spiritual growth and maturity. While pride distances us from God, humility draws us closer to God, opening the door to God's grave favor and protection. Humility is deliberate and a determination to align our hearts with that of God, indicating that we need God in our lives to receive his grace and favor. James 4:6 reads, "But he gives us more grace. God opposes the proud but shows favor to the humble." This verse tells us that God resists the proud, but he is attracted to the humble, granting them his grace because they show that they need God in their lives. Isaiah 66:2 supports this action by God when it states, "These are the ones I look on with favor, those who are humble and contrite in spirit and who tremble at my word. The foundation for humility is in recognizing our dependence on God for our very existence. Once we have this realization, we will approach life with submission, gratitude, and reference to God. The humble learn to wait on God for elevation, blessing, favor, and promotion in life. 1 Peter 5:6 reads, "Humble yourselves therefore under God's mighty hand, that he may lift you up in due time." Thus, when we humble ourselves and patiently wait for God, he will surely elevate us at the right time. Those who humble themselves will be elevated, but the proud will be brought down. Matthew 23:12 reads, "For those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted." This verse shows that true elevation comes through humility, because God raises us up even beyond our expectations when we humble ourselves. The power of humility is positive and immense. Humility attracts God's grace, brings exaltation, increases wisdom, strengthens relationships, promotes dependence on God, brings rest to our souls, and imitates Jesus Christ. Humility brings about deeper spiritual growth and greater unity with others, and aligns us with God's will. Ultimately, humility allows us to fulfill God's purposes and experience His fullness in our lives. To be humble, we must be determined to reject pride. But how do we do that? I will discuss some ways to do that next. Even in our daily life today, there are many examples of people who still tread the destructive path of pride. We encounter them at work, in public spaces, in politics, and in many other places. Thus, there is a great need to educate people on how to overcome the attitude of pride today. Overcoming and rejecting pride is an intentional and deliberate personal development, requiring employing a high level of emotional intelligence, especially self-awareness. The first step is awareness of the attitude of pride. Friends and family can help in identifying pride in the behavior of another member and inform them of this attitude. When pride raises its ugly head, one must take the time to become self-aware and cognizant of one's thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. One must also reflect on how this behavior will affect others. Once pride is identified, one must use self-regulation techniques to suppress the attitude, replacing it with humility and consideration. Some signs of pride include being easily angered, inability to accept negative feedback, and difficulty in accepting mistakes. Some strategies for overcoming pride and embracing humility include admitting mistakes, accepting feedback, celebrating the success of others, performing acts of kindness, volunteering, listening actively to others, not boasting of yourself, being patient, avoiding judging others, acknowledging your limitations, managing your emotions, showing empathy, adopt Christian practices, and celebrating small achievements. Humility is about changing our focus from ourselves to God, recognizing that He is the source of all we have and all we have accomplished. Embracing humility is a continuous process and must be practiced all the time to achieve some level of success. It is about embracing the truth that we are God's beloved children, created in His image and cherished by Him despite our flaws and failings. We have a choice between pride, which ultimately leads to downfall and destruction, and humility, which brings us freedom, God's favor, grace, and exaltation. I urge us to choose humility and abandon pride to live a happy life that pleases God. Let us choose the path of humility, acknowledging our need for God's mercy and allowing His love to heal and restore us. Let us strive to live lives marked by gratitude, compassion, and a genuine desire to love and serve others, reflecting the transformative power of God's grace in a world desperately in need of His love. For it is in humility that we discover our true identity and enjoy the abundant life of grace, favor, and blessing that He intends for us. We have come to the end of another interesting video discussing an important human behavior that could have a devastating effect on our lives. I believe you have learned a great deal about pride and its destructive power. More importantly, you have also learned about how to reject pride and embrace humility, an alternative behavior that can bring joy and grace, favor and blessing of God on our lives. Thank you for watching the video to the end. Please like, share, and subscribe to my channel to be notified of new videos whenever I upload them to my channel. Thank you and goodbye.